Welcome to the PowettPlay Podcast, where international cricketer Kieran Powell and marketing genius Shannon join forces, bringing you captivating conversations with the biggest players in cricket and business. Join us as we dive into the lives of current stars in the cricketing world, the legends before them, and those extraordinary icons whose performances changed the game in both cricket and business. Exploring journeys both on and off the pitch, the boardroom, and everything in between. Get ready for an exhilarating blend of cricket, life, and business insights, with two insatiably passionate, infuriatingly no-holds-barred hosts, who, unfortunately for the rest of us, live and breathe this stuff for a living.
Hello everybody and welcome to episode 55 of the PowettPlay Podcast. Today we are joined by a very, very special guest, actor Sid Mallya. How are you, Sid?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's a pleasure, and Happy New Year to you both as well.
And you.
Happy New Year,
So in terms of obviously starting out, I wanted to sort of start from the very beginning and stuff. So, talk about your childhood and where did you spend most of your time?
Yeah, so I grew up in the UK, out in the countryside, about 45 minutes south of London in Surrey. Went to boarding school when I was 10, just before my 11th birthday. I was in boarding school till 18. First at a school called Powett in Ascot, and then at Wellington College. And then university in London, in East London, in Mile End, at Queen Mary, and then that was pretty much my early childhood and schooling. Yeah.
And what was you studying at that point then when you went to university?
I went and did business management.
Right.
With sort of like somewhat of an idea of going into the family business. That was kind of like what my plan was, and so studying business seemed to be the like most obvious thing to do.
And with that in mind, you mentioned there about the family business. Did you have something potentially earmarked for you to go into, or was it down to yourself to sort of determine which sort of sector you was to go into? Yeah,
so at the time we were prevalent in alcohol, so mainly in beer, spirits, so Indian whiskies and that sort of stuff, and aviation were the three sort of main parts of the business. And for me, it was the spirit side of thing that I wanted to go into.
Right.
So I actually ended up working for a company called Diageo in the UK after graduating from university. I was assistant brand manager on Guinness.
Nice.
For a year, and at the time, Guinness was the sponsor of the Premiership Rugby in the UK. And rugby, sorry, Kieran, is my favourite sport. So it was pretty cool being able to work on that from that age.
Right. So in terms of what would the role entail then as an assistant brand manager then for Guinness?
Yeah, I mean, it was. I think each of us, God, if I remember back, we were all given sort of like a responsibility. I was working with the guy that was taking care of sponsorship at the time, so it was, it was ensuring that all the Guinness point of sale was available at the matches, and that kind of stuff. One responsibility I did have, which was actually quite cool. Pretty random as well, is that the Premiership trophy that they present at the end of the season used to sit in our basement in the Diageo office.
Right.
So it would go to Twickenham for the final, the team would get given it, and I guess they'd get to sort of keep it for maybe a month afterwards, and then it would be returned to us and kept under lock and key. And it was my responsibility to make sure that thing was accounted for.
But in terms of your experiences with Diageo, and then obviously being, I wouldn't say involved, but obviously understanding what was going on with UB, how did the roles sort of differ from, say, the Indian market to, say, the UK market, really?
In terms of what?
So, like the alcoholic in India versus how it is in the UK, really.
Well, the big difference between the two is that India is known as a media dark market when it comes to advertising alcohol. So you can't actually advertise alcohol in India. So what one would have to do was come up with surrogates. So, Kingfisher had Kingfisher water.
Yeah.
A lot of the whiskey brands would make apple juices. Because you could use them in the adverts, right? You could use them in the ads, and for all intents and purposes, apple juice and whiskey looks the same. Which is actually now when we're acting as well. When I'm doing films, obviously they're not giving you booze on set, so a lot of it is similar to that. They'll give you something that looks the same but is different. But that was the big sort of big difference between the two, is that in one market in the UK you could get away with advertising it, but in India you had to sort of find other ways to do it.
And then from Diageo, what was your next step, like career step from there?
So from there I moved to India, and this is now beginning of 2010. And I was sort of given the responsibility of RCB at that time for that 2010 season. I think the IPL started in 2008, so 8, 9, 10. So this would have been season 4, 3, I think it was. And it was that was kind of my role, where I was made a director of the team, but I was sort of looking after everything pretty much everything involved in it, which was cool.
So go on then, in a bit more detail. When you say involved in everything, what are we dealing with? Players? Are we dealing what did the role entail?
I think it was again, I'm trying to get my dates right in my head, but I think my first meaningful contribution was signing Owen Morgan, which is not a bad first step to take.
No.
And the reason is that because I remember at the time, like, so as I said, so I grew up here, right?
Yeah.
Now T20 started. When was the first year of the T20? I think it was 2004.
Yeah.
When it started here, it wasn't I think it was the Blast, whatever they used to call it.
Yeah.
And it was still fairly new elsewhere around the world, right? I mean, apart from the IPL, I think you probably had the Big Bash starting around the same time.
Yeah.
But I was kind of, I'd known about T20 cricket because I'd grown up here when it was going on, and I grew up in Surrey. Surrey was always my team. Surrey was pretty good back in those early days of T20 cricket. So I'd seen a lot of these like domestic players. And I remember seeing Owen Morgan. I don't know if he'd been capped at this point. No, I think he hadn't been. This was the thing. If I remember this correctly, I think we could have. I don't know if he'd been capped at the time, or he wasn't who he was, right? He wasn't the Owen Morgan that ended up being who he is today. I don't think. This was before the T20 World Cup that England won in 2010 as well. So he was there and thereabout. He was a squad man. He was around. And I remember when there was an auction before that 2010 season, and I'd seen this guy play and heard about him, like sort of, you'd seen what he was doing domestically and stuff like that. And he was a big hitter. And I was like, quite keen on signing him. And we did.
So how would you go? So you're saying that? So did you have to go about contract negotiations with him? Or
I didn't do the negotiations. The negotiations are kind of like done by the legal, with the offices and the agents and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I tell you whose contract negotiations I was involved with, and we'll probably get to this, was with Chris Gales.
Right.
that was. I mean, we can talk about that as well, because that was probably the greatest signing, probably in the history of T20 cricket, if I'm honest. And I also think it might have been the most important signing as well. And I'll get onto that in a minute. But with Morgan, it was it was more about just trying to convince the powers be at the time, my dad and whoever else was involved in it from the RCB side of like, look, this guy is someone worth having.
Yeah, definitely. And then did you feel any pressure with that?
No, not really, because I think that you remember now that this, I'm going to read out some of these names or try and get them off the top of my head from that RCB team in 2010. All right. Yeah. I mean, you had
AD Villiers, didn't you?
No, not yet. Okay. So that's that. This is pre de Villiers. You had Raul Dravid, a player of that caliber can play any sort of format, right? Jacques Callis, Robin Utapa, Dale Steyn. I think Virat was coming into bat at like number 6 or something ridiculous. You had Manish Pandey, who at the time was, he hit the first Indian to hit a century in the IPL.
Yeah.
I mean, it was crazy amounts of talent in that team. So I think it was like, Morgan he was only going to add to what was already there. It was never going to be something that was ever going to take away something.
Yeah.
But yeah, that team that season, we got to the semi-final.
So go back to the Chris Gale bit then. Go on, this is going to be interesting.
Well, the Gale one was interesting because that was now I think this is now 2011. Okay, so at this point we've done from my involvement in the team, right? We've done the 2010 season. We finished 3rd. Gone and done that Champions League in South Africa. In I think that was that's September or October that year. Again, finished. I want to say I don't even know if we made it to the semi-finals. We might have made it to the semis, got knocked out in the semis. So we were doing quite well, but weren't, sort of story of RCB, doing quite well, but never quite managing to finish the job. Also, this was an era where you had Chennai winning everything.
Yeah.
And then Gale came about because, I don't know, is Kieran frozen?
I think so, yeah. Swans.
So you guys can check this out, verify this. But I'm pretty sure that Gale was first with Calcutta, right? Knight Riders.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then the 2011 auction or whatever it was comes out and he gets unpicked. So he's unsold.
Yes.
I'm correct in this, right? So KKR released him and then he's released and then he's unsold. We start the season and we get an injury to one of our international players. I think, if I remember right, it was Dirk Nannes. Remember Dirk Nannes? So Dirk Nannes is a fast bowler.
Yeah.
So you would think the logical thing would be to replace him with another fast bowler.
No.
But we replaced him with Chris. And his first game for us was against Calcutta in Calcutta, and I think he hit 100. And then that was just the start of,
Hail Mary.
the rest is kind of history. But
greatest run of batting ever.
Greatest run of batting. I mean, and not only that, but okay, you don't want to ever take credit for something because Chris Gale is Chris Gale. I mean, he's a legend. But what if we hadn't picked him in that 2011 season, right? And he didn't have that year that he had.
Yeah.
Now you got to think to yourself, you're like, okay, would he have been picked again? Because he'd been released by one team, not picked again. And then you just kind of think that would we have maybe seen the best out of him for the next 10 years that we saw if he wasn't given that shot? And I think that's so fascinating, right? With sports, it's how many great players do you think have gone by the wayside just because they didn't get the opportunity?
Mm.
Yeah.
And I mean, this is a guy that, in my mind, Chris Gale will go down in history as one of the most important cricket players not just because of the way that first of all, look at the sheer stats, right? People forget that, like, they think, okay, Chris Gale, big hitting, hit sixes. Sure, the guy's got a triple 100 in Test cricket. I think sometimes that gets forgotten, right? Like, so when you look at just sort of what he's achieved with the bat and the way that he would take bowlers on and hit sixes, from that point of view, he was an entertainer. He sold tickets, and more than that, he was a character. And sport, I believe, needs characters in order to keep growing the game. And that's why, for me, that Chris Gale is one of the most important cricketers there's ever been. Not just of what he did on the field, but just the way he conducted himself off it, in the personality that he was. People like that can only serve to help grow an audience.
100%. I think you talk about there as the complete package in terms of what he brought. He put bums on seats, personality, charisma, everything that he brought. And I think, from a franchise perspective as well, like, you need people like that. You can have all the ability in the world, but Chris seemed to have everything, and time, like you mentioned there, the timing was so important. And you look back now and think about what could have been. It could be worlds apart.
It's huge. Like we've got to remember at the time as well, the West Indies weren't doing particularly well, right? During that period. The West Indies were the West Indies. Powerhouses of world cricket, but for a period of time, they'd sort of perhaps not been performing to how teams of the past of the West Indies had passed. So again, for Chris to be able to do what he did, coming from a national team that probably wasn't doing that well at the time, it's huge. It's not like he was an Indian, right? If for an Indian to get crowds going and everything, you kind of have an inbuilt fan base.
Yeah.
So I think for people like him, AB de Villiers is another one, to be able to penetrate the Indian market and that subcontinent market and create the followings that they did. It takes something special.
Yeah, I think you mentioned there about the sort of outside of Indian market. He allowed that opportunity for people to come in and really make a name for themselves outside, like you mentioned there, of the big Indian names as well. So it's especially in the infancy stages of the IPL as well. It sort of give that massive platform for people to come into the IPL. Whether that be with solid resumes or not, and to give them that sort of platform to go and make a massive career out of the T20 franchise game overall.
Yeah, well, I think that's what the IPL did, right? Yeah. I think that it made cricket for a lot of people actually a viable career option.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because beforehand, it was like, if you're not playing for your national team, you probably aren't going to be making enough money playing, Ranji Trophy cricket. Even the county players in the UK, I'm sure at the time they weren't. And I'm sure it's the same thing with first class cricket in the West Indies, right? Are you making enough to really be able to sit back and say that, I'm making a good enough living to support my life and the family and all this stuff? The answer is probably no. So then if you're a young kid growing up, parents are probably less inclined to support this ambition unless you're one of those players that's got a chance of making it internationally. Yeah. Today, you can now make a very lucrative career being a professional cricketer without ever representing your country. Mm. There's like, I'll go and watch like the IPL today, and I'm not watching it as much because I'm living in LA and obviously the time difference and stuff. But bro, there are like players that are making $1 million, $2 million in the auction that I've never even heard of. Yeah, and I'm sure it's the same for you guys as well. These are players that probably will never even play for India.
Yeah,
but it's now opened up the opportunity for people to have careers doing the thing that they love, which I think is great.
Yeah, massively. And like you said, it's allowed. Sorry, Kai, go on.
No, I just wanted to ask Sid, do you think that that has been sort of a blessing and a curse, sort of T20 franchise cricket?
I think it's okay. So I think there's twofold on this, and then I'd love to hear your perspective on this because you actually played the game. I think it's a blessing in terms of, look, at the end of the day, sport is a form of entertainment. You need to bring eyeballs to the screen. Now, we live in a day and an age. We live in a day and age where people have very short attention spans, right? So T20 cricket solved that problem. So I think from that point of view, in terms of getting audiences excited and bringing in a fan base, I think it's great from that point of view. I also think that it's having these leagues all over the world and giving people the opportunity to go and play these leagues is also great as well. Where it could be a curse is if it then ends up being detrimental to the international game, which ultimately should always be the pinnacle, I believe. Yeah, I mean, that should really be what someone aspires to do, right? I mean, to play for your country like you have, I mean, is there a higher honor than that? Probably not. Well, at least there shouldn't be from an outsider's point of view. And I think that if it is having a negative effect on international cricket, then I'd say it's a little bit of a curse.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because ultimately these leagues have to be sanctioned by the ICC. So it's the ICC's best interest to look after the international game, but then it's lucrative for them in that sense to have T20 franchise leagues as well. I think the game is sort of eating itself at the moment with the amount of T20 franchise leagues, and there's not enough, I guess, players or players of that quality for T20 franchise leagues and international cricket to operate at the same time. So I think if they're going to sort of continue to go down this road, they're going to have to do it in, I guess, segments where they sort of have obviously the different hemispheres and different weather patterns throughout different parts of the world. So you could say when it's, let's say, summer in Australia, New Zealand, those places, they've got their T20 leagues set out at a certain time. They may run parallel to each other. Same as for Asia, Middle East, those leagues may run at the same sort of time of year. So you may find a situation where there's a BPL, PSL, LPL, IPL, ILT20 all playing at the same time. But it's going to be pretty much damn near impossible in the near future to have a window for all of these separate leagues and still have international cricket being played throughout. For
sure. Well, I think on that then, I guess my question is, if that happens, let's say, right? And let's say you get in a situation where the IPL, the PSL, the one in the UAE, all of these are happening at the same time, then it only becomes a matter of time where everything that isn't the IPL ceases to exist. Because if people want to watch the top talent, and if the IPL is bringing in the top talent and the other leagues can't bring in the top talent, then you'd have to think that the viewership for those leagues is going to diminish. And then as a result, sponsorship and all of that is going to go as well. So is it a situation then, I guess, if it goes down the route that you're suggesting, it almost takes care of itself, where it ends up being kind of a survival of the fittest situation, where by proxy, you only end up with 3 or 4 of these leagues because the others can't compete with them.
I think what's happening now is because each league sort of figures out a window outside of the IPL, that's where you're having, I guess, this big conflict of interest, because then it's just a matter of cream of the crop obviously goes to the IPL. And then once that's not on, then it's just a battle for survival for the other leagues, where the best players sort of go to the highest paid leagues available at that point in time.
Yeah.
sorry to dive back in. I wanted to ask in terms of obviously the RCB side of things, in terms of like, so obviously with the family owning the franchise, how did it look from a perspective from a branding perspective? Is it something that did the UB group always want to get involved in it with Indian cricket in that side of things, and did the opportunity come about? How did it sort of all start out initially?
Yeah, well, I wasn't involved in the first season when the auctions were done and everything, and my dad got involved with it, and he was the one that ultimately bought the team. But I think it was seen obviously as an opportunity, as a way to concurrently help the core business, which was the alcohol. I mean, the team was called Royal Challengers, and one of the whiskies was Royal Challenge. And then if you saw all the sponsorship on the jerseys at the time when we were involved, they were all in-house brands that were sponsoring sponsoring the jersey and all of that stuff. So I think it ended up being, it was its own separate entity, but it ended up being a vehicle that ended up helping the core business as well.
Right.
And the UB group was, I remember we used to be the title sponsor of the West Indies back in 97. I think it was 97. Yeah, it was 97. I was on the West Indies kit, Kingfisher was. So we've been involved with cricket for a number of years before the IPL as well.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to ask you about the role that you did in terms of the green initiatives. How did that come about? Well, really. So
that came from, actually, I think that was something I picked up when I was at Diageo with Guinness, because they were doing the pink games for breast cancer in the Premiership at the time. I think Harlequins was doing it with whoever it was, and they'd wear those pink jerseys.
Yeah. So
I was like, all right, well, why don't we see if we can do something like that? And Bangalore is known as India's Garden City.
Right.
So I was like, okay, I think something quite cool would be to do something for the environment. Why don't we see if we can do a green game once a season where we wear green, and basically it just helps promote the environment, and we can do our bit to sort of take the platform that we have and also promote a social cause.
Yeah.
And it ended up doing really well. I think, I don't know if you know this, but the team ended up being the world's first ever carbon neutral cricket team and the world's first ever carbon neutral sports team through fan engagement. So what we did is, I think at one of the games, we got the fans, if they wanted to exchange their light bulbs for energy efficient ones. And through that initiative, we got this accolade.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's naturally people will always talk about successes in terms of obviously from the cricket perspective and that thing, but that's a real tangible success in terms of bringing something like that. It's a brilliant achievement, to be fair. Kai, have you got anything more you want to talk from the cricketing side of things you want to dive into?
I'm looking to dive into the Formula One side of things.
Formula One. I will just quickly, last thing then on the cricket, tell you that this is funny because I was obviously involved in the IPL and, went to all the stadiums in India and did all of that stuff.
Yeah.
I've seen India play and all over the world, this and that. But without a doubt, the craziest atmosphere I have ever seen in my life was, because we were also involved with the Tridents, Barbados, during the CPL for a while. We had an away game, and I was kind of out of the cricketing world at this point. I was in my acting career, but because my dad couldn't travel, I went and spent some time during 2 seasons with the CPL. But we had this away game in Trinidad, and I have never seen anything like that in my life. I mean, it was a night game. It was all black. All the lights were off, and the team wears red, so it was just like these red neon line. I have never seen a more hostile environment for a team to play in than that. I mean, there was me and a couple others had the Barbados jerseys on, and we were being taken for like a lap. I don't know, somewhere around the boundary. And I have not been heckled or abused like that in my life. And I was like, I mean, it was really eye-opening. I was like, they are hardcore there. And I was like, that was quite an experience.
No, Trinidad are very passionate about their cricket.
Yeah. Really passionate.
Very, very passionate about their cricket. And you can see by the players that they've produced from since T20's come about why they would be. They've produced some of the best T20 players in the world.
Yeah.
That was a good experience, though. You know, I mean, taking what you did, you know, with RCB and then trying to sort of carry that over with the Tridents and stuff. But the differences in terms of like the cultural experience, that was, you know, quite a interesting time to see the comparisons, really, or the differences as well.
I mean, huge difference. I think one of the biggest differences for me was, you know, the IPL. If you played for, no one, if you had someone playing for Bangalore, like the Bangaloreans liked having Karnataka players in the team, like local players. But if you weren't a Karnataka player, they didn't really care too much. But I remember there was a little bit of an uproar from a few people when we made Pollard the captain of Barbados, and him not being a Bayesian, and I think that was something that I hadn't experienced in India as much, which was very much like, no, we're Barbados. These players, or at least the captain, should be Bayesians, like that kind of mentality.
Yep, 100%. And I think there was even added uproar because I think Nicholas Puran had just come off an accident or something. He got
correct,
and they were not happy at all.
And then he did really well. So then they were okay. But Puran had just had that bike crash, I think, and then he'd come back and. But I didn't realize that there was that amount of I don't know what you'd call it, but like I guess pride in and division at the same time. Yeah, they're very nationalist, patriotic type people in the different Caribbean regions. So I think little things like that I guess, as you said, someone not being from that region and not understanding, you know, those are huge things that Caribbean people take, especially Trinidad and Barbados. They've got a intense rivalry that goes, I guess, political ties as well. So
Interesting. So go on. Kieran's obviously desperate to get into the F1 side of things.
Let's go. How did this come about? I've sort of become a Formula One fan, I'd say 2018, 17, around that point in time.
Nice.
Never really connected the dots that Force India was your team. How did that come about, your interest in Formula One?
Yeah, well, that's something that's actually entirely my dad. He's been involved in motor racing for years. I mean, even before I was born. I think he was the first person to bring a Formula One car and drive it in India. I want to say in the 80s. It might have been earlier. It might have been slightly later, but around then. And he's always been big into motorsport. Kingfisher was the sponsor of the Benetton team in 96. Might have been a little bit before that as well. And then Kingfisher was a sponsor of Toyota before the Force India thing came about. So again, we've always had an interest in motorsport. In fact, my dad was actually the national champion.
I remember.
In India. Yeah. So he's always been involved in it in some capacity.
And what was that experience like? Like, how do you find the daily operations? I guess from your whatever experience you would have had. Obviously, with your
I was not involved in the Formula One from an operations standpoint, but I mean, just like looking at it from the outside, and sort of comparing it to the cricket,
Yeah.
it's a much vaster operation, right? I mean, when it comes to the cricket, you've got a squad of players. Really, you're really dealing with individuals, their managers maybe, and then you probably 10 support staff in total. So it's a fairly small, tight knit group. But then you look at the Formula One, you've got people on the ground at the races, you've got people back at the factory, and it's a really, really big operation. But one thing I think is quite similar between Formula One and kind of like what the IPL was, it was almost like it's quite a tight knit group, because it's the same people traveling to the same races every week. So you're kind of seeing the same people.
Yeah.
And I felt like there was quite a lot of camaraderie between people in different teams from that point of view in Formula One and in the cricket, which was pretty cool.
Yeah.
What do you think cricket could take from, I guess, Formula One and the way that they market themselves or position themselves as a sport? Because I think that, let's say in the past 5 years in particular, that the sport has really jumped to prominence in a lot of people's eyes, and they keep adding new races in different parts of the world and just keep expanding.
Well, I think there's a few different elements to this. I think firstly, and this is from talking to various different people, I think that the Drive to Survive documentary series that Netflix started to do, just because it kind of opens up a window into everything that goes on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
And I think that people really like that. I think the thing that Formula One suffered from for a long time is that people saw it as very elitist and very closed off. And something like Drive to Survive, what that does is it makes it more accessible.
Yeah.
And I love those sorts of documentaries. I remember there was one that the British Lions used to do every year called Living with the Lions. And I used to love watching that, because it's like, you see the games, right? You watch it, but you want to know what these guys are up to behind the scenes.
Yeah.
So I don't know if something like that could potentially help. But I think the one thing that cricket could learn is, and I think this is kind of like where I think cricket might struggle a little bit, is Formula One is seen as the pinnacle, right, of motorsport.
Yeah.
Okay. If you want to make it, you go to Formula One. It is the pinnacle of four-wheel driving. And it's contained. There's 24 races a season. At every one of those 24 races, you're going to have the best drivers in the world, the same teams, all of that stuff. Cricket, the first question to ask is, what is the pinnacle of the sport?
Well,
and that's the big problem, I think, is that you ask, the traditionalists will tell you playing Test cricket is the pinnacle. Great. I think an endurance sport like 5 days is the pinnacle of it. But now today, is the pinnacle that, or is the pinnacle 2020 cricket, or is the that's the issue, or is the pinnacle some people will tell you playing in the IPL is the pinnacle of cricket nowadays, where you're literally playing against the best of the best. So I think once you can establish what is the pinnacle of this sport and focusing on that, I think that's going to really then help to potentially help market it.
Yeah. Because I think you mentioned there about the Drive to Survive sort of stuff. The Amazon series that they do with the American football, they've done various ones with the football in the UK. They did the Test, which followed Australia. And I
love that as well.
Yeah, they are so insightful, because you get to see the behind the scenes and you get to see what you don't see, basically, by watching the games. And I think it would be very, very insightful. You mentioned there about pinnacle, and is it the IPL? If you should carry one out with an IPL franchise from, not just from the games, but from the leading into it, from how you carry it out, the thought process, the draft, various bits and pieces like that, dealing with with differences in terms of bringing players in and how you manage it. I think it would give a really good insight into the Pinnacle, but from a franchise perspective. There's always going to be disagreements in terms of Pinnacle from a cricket side of things. Is it the Ashes? Is that what's great? Is it India versus Australia, which which is taking place at the minute? But from a franchise perspective, everyone knows that the IPL is the number one. So some behind the scenes footage like that would be a massive advantage for cricket, I think.
But then I guess the question I get is that, and I guess is to ask you guys as well, what you think on this is that going to actually bring any more people in that there already is? Because I feel like, yeah, sorry.
No, sorry, not to cut you off, Sid. I think that cricket is actually not even tapping its potential, its true potential when you look at it. I think football is maxing out what it can do.
Yeah.
Cricket is basically, in all realities, an Asian sport, which gives us most of the population of people that watches it, and a few sparse scatterings around the world. If we really start to tap into places like China and, I guess, South America, North America, those are the places. I definitely think cricket could be by far the biggest sport in the world once done properly.
Well, that's why they're putting all this money into America, right? To see if they can hit that market. But I think also with what you just said, let's take for the sake of argument that the pinnacle of limited overs cricket is the ODI World Cup, which it should be. I don't think by reducing the amount of teams in a tournament like that, you're going to help grow and do what you're saying, which is tapping into the market. I think that right. Football is smart. They know that it's not about making. It's about. I think the next World Cup has got 48 teams in it or something.
Yes.
And that's exactly how cricket. I remember the year India won it, 2011. It was 12 teams, 2 groups of 6, and this 10-team round-robin tournament is no good for anyone because what happens is that I think, so at least in the T20 cricket, right? In the T20 cricket, you're seeing upsets happen.
Yeah.
Right? You're seeing, but an upset should actually mean the team that's doing the upsetting should have a chance then of progressing. Like Afghanistan getting to the semifinals of the T20 World Cup is brilliant for the sport.
Yeah.
But if you've got a 10-team tournament, and let's say you have the Netherlands in it, if the Netherlands pull off a shock win against England, well then, unless they do 2 or 3 or 4 of those things, it means nothing. They're not going to progress beyond where they are. Now, you go back to obviously what happened in 2007 in the West Indies when Pakistan was beaten by Ireland and India was beaten by Bangladesh. And, I understand why they've changed the format to the way that they have, because I know how much money the broadcasters lost by having Pakistan and India go out in the first round. But I still think that you should be looking to expand this thing and letting these players compete at the highest level.
Yeah.
I mean, the last World Cup, the West Indies weren't even in it. West Indies aren't in it. Ireland aren't in it. I mean, again, I'll talk about the Irish. The Ireland have proven that on their day they can win. Now, if you're not going to give them the opportunity to compete on the biggest stage, then what is the point? Is the way that I see it. And I, of course, I'm not speaking from a financial point of view or anything like that. I don't know the money people involved in this. I'm just speaking from a fan point of view. I want to see as many different teams involved in this as possible. Just so you can get not only a bigger viewership base for the sport, but you can also unearth talent that might not necessarily otherwise be unearthed. I think, again, just on this, when Rashid Khan topped the rankings for T20 bowling, I think that was a huge day for cricket. You have a player from Afghanistan who is ranked the number 1 bowler in the world, 20 years ago, is anyone telling you that Afghanistan was a cricketing nation? No. But how are you going to find the next Rashid Khan or the next Afghanistan if you don't give these teams a chance?
Yeah,
that's it. No, definitely.
I think that's where FIFA sort of taps into this level of expansion that you speak about. Because you look at a FIFA World Cup, even you look at a Champions League, which is not a World Cup, and they just keep expanding and keep giving more teams the opportunities. Because as you said, that's the only way you can unearth the next Afghanistan or whatever the case is. I mean, Sri Lanka in, what was it, 1996 when they came and won the World Cup out of nowhere. So it's just about giving, I guess, these countries added support, added opportunities. I've been a big fan of, if, for example, a team is going to tour England, why don't they stop over and play a game in Scotland, in the Netherlands, and in Ireland to continue to help them with their development? And that helps the touring team to prepare for their tour of England as well. So it's just, just simple things like that, in my opinion, that could continue to grow the game. But Jordan, if we may, let's take another twist here. I want to just say a bit more about the business world in India. I know we tapped into it briefly, more so from the aspect of working with Diageo, etc. But the Kingfisher brand, obviously one of the biggest brands in India, not just the alcohol and the spirits and stuff, but the airline company as well. What was, I guess, the initial vision that your dad may have had, and obviously you choosing to do business management at that point in time? What were your sort of plans in terms of taking it forward? Because I think that India is going to be probably the most interesting place to do business in the next 25 years, given its expansion on a global stage. So I'm just trying to figure out certain things for myself here.
Yeah, I mean, I was only really in the business world, in the family, before I went off and started pursuing acting for only a couple of years. But I think it was being able to just continue to grow what we had, and maybe look at doing things elsewhere as well. We had White and Mackay in Scotland, and a bunch of other businesses as well. But I think it was just continuing to grow and maintain what was already there. At the time, United Spirits was the largest spirits company in the world by volume. And I think knowing that India was a very young country, I believe it was something like some statistic that 70% of the country is under 30, or it's something like that.
Yeah.
And knowing that there was this young demographic, and Kingfisher always sort of positioning itself as not a beer but more of a lifestyle brand.
Yeah.
And knowing that you could tap into that emerging youth as they got older. The other thing in India is that I think the Indians of India today, the younger generation, have more expendable income than any previous generation has ever had, and it almost seems like it's okay that it's okay to sort of celebrate success now in India, which and I think that's what makes it quite interesting, is that it is so young, and it does have that potential because of the youngsters having more opportunities than any generations had before.
Jordan, any questions for you about it?
Yeah, when I was looking into it and looking, the Kingfisher brand and the group overall, I felt as though that it was very much ahead of its time. I felt as though nowadays everything's about influencers and that side of things. I felt that they had this real image, and obviously your father was very much behind that and stuff, but it felt as though it was ahead of its time from like an influencer side of things, and that likability and that association that people wanted to be a part of the brand image, really.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's something that Kingfisher has always done pretty well.
Yeah.
has made itself a lifestyle and aspirational, something aspirational. And, there was no better brand ambassador for it than my dad himself. Simply put, because, the slogan of Kingfisher is the king of good times. And they'd refer to my dad as the king of good times. Now, anytime he was ever mentioned in a publication or on the news, they would always say the king of good times.
Yeah.
Now, that's millions and millions of dollars of free advertising just off the back of that.
Yeah.
So, I do definitely think that from that point of view, my dad was ahead of his time in terms of his vision and being able to see an opportunity.
Yeah. And then obviously going back to post now. So when did you always have aspirations to become an actor? Was it always something you had an interest in, or where did that sort of, career path sort of develop from, really?
Yeah, it was something I liked. I mean, I'm an only child. I grew up as an only child, so I always had a pretty wild imagination. So I think it probably cultivated from when I was young. But really, it came from after spending a year and a half, 2 years in India, just realizing that actually the business world wasn't really what I wanted to do. I think I always thought it's what I wanted to do because, that's what the family did. So why would I know any different? And I think living in India for me was also a challenge. And then during the IPL, when I was able to really interact with people and I was able to do interviews and stuff like that, that's when I always felt like I was A, most at peace, but B, where I was also being able to operate at the highest level. And choosing a career where I was able to express myself, I think was what being able to express myself during the IPL and seeing that that's actually where I felt like I was the most at peace is then what led me to make the decision to go and do this full time.
And was that quite hard to make that call in terms of coming away, I suppose, from the family business, really?
Yeah, it was hard. I mean, I remember having a chat with my dad about it, and it couldn't have been easy for him, me saying that I didn't really want to be involved in the business, but he was very supportive of it. And he's like, ultimately, you've got to go and do what you love. Yeah. Which I did. I think the hardest part of it is now I can look back on it because it's hindsight's a wonderful thing. But I think the hardest part of it was when I moved to LA to go and do this. I didn't really know anyone. I didn't really know how it worked or anything like that. So there was a lot of people trying to advise me on what I should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And I think a lot of them perhaps had one eye on, oh, well, if we help him, then his family will help us kind of thing. And I think that was probably the hardest thing now looking back on it, was that I probably didn't get the best advice when I made that move.
So what year was that when you moved to America?
2012.
Right, okay. And from there, was it a case of, starting from the bottom, or did you have any sort of previous sort of work that you could obviously I know you mentioned they're doing the stuff side of things with RCB.
Well, no, I mean, I had a very top agency sign me and take me over there, and I was getting good auditions and stuff, but it very quickly became apparent that no, I was starting at the bottom. I was doing like what every other beginning actor would do, going to acting class, training, learning, going to do auditions, that kind of stuff. And, it's only now 10, 12 years later that things are starting to actually click for me. And it's like with anything in life, right? It takes a while to sort of learn the ropes and then to pay your dues per se. And I think I probably could have taken shortcuts along the way just because of the connections we had and stuff like that. And I think there were a lot of people, as I said, who were sort of trying to nudge me to do that. But I'm happy I didn't. And I'm happy that I went about it the way that I did. So yeah. Good.
Kai, have you got anything?
No, I'm just interested to figure out, why did you sort of choose to go to Hollywood as opposed to maybe starting in Bollywood?
Yeah, well, two reasons. One, I was born in America, so I was an American citizen. So that kind of made it easier for me to go there. And I think the other reason was, if I'm honest about it, was probably fear. But being in Bollywood, I would have been scrutinized. I would have been known. I would have been like, oh, here's just some industrialist son that now wants to become an actor kind of thing. And I think I didn't want to deal with any of that. Also, I'm not a huge fan of Bollywood films. I don't really watch a lot of them. So I don't think the sensibilities would have been right. That's why.
No, I think clearly, obviously you are a hard worker, like a hard grafter, because most people would have taken the easy option, but you obviously dedicated yourself to the craft. And would you like to give a shout out to your new project that's coming out?
Yeah. I actually just had a film that came out last month called Mafia Wars. I think you can, if you're watching this in the UK, you can get it on Sky. But otherwise it's available on all the other major platforms. And then I just signed my next film, which shoots beginning of this year, or sometime in the first quarter, called Thrill Ride. So looking forward to doing that, seeing what else comes.
So how long does it take from audition stage to say shooting? How long does it normally take?
I mean, it can be quick. From audition to shooting can be, sometimes you can audition, you'll be shooting the next day, depending on what the role is. Yeah, like if it's for TV and it's a show that's already ongoing, you can find yourself on set the next day. But otherwise, it really just depends on the project. I know that this film I got offered, I'd met the director in August.
Right. Okay.
But then, when the thing with films is there's so many moving parts that need to come together in order for something to shoot, like availability of the director. Okay, well, he's not available in this window. Now we have to push it. Okay, now the actor's not available or the location's not available. And so it can take a little bit of time. Yeah. Especially the people that I'm working with this new film, they're great producers. They like to have everything sorted out ahead of time. Yeah. Instead of just trying to figure it out as they go along, which a lot of people do it. And sadly, I think that's why a lot of films end up not getting completed. So better to take your time up front.
No, it's interesting. Very interesting. Looking forward to seeing it, to be fair.
Yeah.
A random question, really, but you don't drink anymore, do you? Was that something that how did that sort of come about? I know I've read a bit about, obviously, from the mental health side of things that you spoke openly about before. Was that something that you worked towards, or how did that sort of come about, really?
Yeah, so that was all sort of mental health related. I suffer from clinical OCD, and just the drinking, whether I'd had 10 drinks or 2 drinks the next day, the anxiety would be off the scale. And it would actually last for a few days after that. So it got to a point where I was like, you know what, this just isn't a way that I want to live. So I'm gonna stop.
Right. Okay. And how has it helped? How have you found it, really?
Yeah, it's been great. It's been almost 6.5 years. So it's helped me. I feel good about it.
No, that's a fantastic achievement in its own right. Like I said, when I was reading about you, I thought it was, it's especially given the background to come up to speak so openly about it, and you speak so openly about mental health and the benefits of the change that you made. I think it's a massive credit to yourself to be so open about something like that as well, because it would probably take a lot of people just to bury their head in the sand as such, and go about that. So I think I also say it's a credit to yourself and fair play to you.
Appreciate it.
You got anything else, Rob Kai?
No, I think it's been amazing. I think Sid has been very insightful and open. I've honestly really enjoyed this episode. Yeah. So I just want to thank Sid for joining us.
Thanks.
Again, that's what brilliant. Really, really enjoyed it. And obviously I know you know, on this podcast, we spoke a lot about cricket. And we've had the really good discussion there from the ICB side of things, but everything else as part of, you know, your legacy and the family legacy and stuff. It's been really, really insightful. So yeah, like Kieran said, thank you so much for joining us.
No, of course. I've appreciated being here. So thanks very much for having me.
Cheers. And I wish you all the best for shooting the new film, and I hope it's a big success, which no doubt will be.
Yeah. Cheers, guys.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for joining us on the PowettPlay Podcast, hosted by Kieran Powell and Jordan Shannon. We hope you enjoyed this immersive dive into the world of cricket and business, exploring the unique experiences and perspectives of players past and present, alongside those invaluable insights into intriguing business themes that transcend beyond the boundaries of sporting heroics. Be sure to set your reminders on your Alexa or Google Home device. Or we won't tell anyone if you still use those paper calendar things from a bygone era. Join us next time for more inspiring dialogue with scintillating minds on the PowettPlay Podcast.